My name is Dr. Emily Wilson. I'm a naturopathic doctor and an acupuncturist. Is everyone familiar with naturopathic medicine? Yeah? Great. That's wonderful. If you have any questions at all, of course, always just shout them out. Today, we are going to be focusing on the adrenal glands, specifically adrenal fatigue, which is something that I see a lot in my practice, and it comes up inevitably pretty much all the time. So we're going to talk a lot about how the adrenal glands relate to the rest of our bodies, how they can keep us healthy, and what they need when they start to get a little bit tired. And we'll really dive into the idea of adrenal fatigue too, because there's a lot there. So to begin, let's just talk a little bit about exactly what we're going to cover today. So we'll start, I think this is going to be your third slide there. We'll start with what is a healthy adrenal gland? What do our adrenal glands do? And what do they need to be healthy? And then we're going to move into the idea of adrenal fatigue, which is kind of a hot topic in today's world. You see it a lot on the internet. It comes up a lot in just in everyday, but a lot of us don't really know what that means. It's kind of a slippery term, so we'll really dive into what that means. And then, again, because our adrenal glands affect so many parts of our bodies, we're going to talk about some sneaky ways adrenal fatigue can show up in your body and show up in your everyday life or in the lives of the people that you love. And finally, we're going to talk about the fun stuff. We're going to talk about how people heal from adrenal fatigue and how we can support healthy adrenal gland function. And we're definitely going to dive into some really amazing herbs too. So that's going to be the fun part. So let's start. What are healthy adrenal glands? Our adrenal glands are two little glands. They sit on top of our kidneys. And they're actually really tiny, which is pretty amazing because they do so much in our bodies. Each adrenal gland is about 2 inches wide by about 1 inch high. So they're really tiny, but they have the power to really transform our lives for better or for worse, unfortunately. So what do? The adrenal glands are part of our endocrine or our hormone system. So they, of course, will interact with everything. It's a very complex system, and everything has to be in balance for things to work optimally. They secrete 4 types of hormones. The first is called glucocorticoids, and the big one there is cortisol, right? Have you guys all heard of cortisol? Yeah. So glucocorticoids, they do a lot in our bodies. They affect immune health. They affect inflammation, which is another big deal as far as staying healthy on a daily basis. They affect blood sugar, cortisol, and stress. Maybe you guys are familiar with that connection. Cortisol is a huge stress hormone. And also cortisol, really interestingly, helps regulate our sleep-wake cycle. So it works very closely with melatonin to help regulate our energy and our sleep cycles. The next group of hormones is called mineralocorticoids, and they regulate mineral balance and then blood pressure in our bodies. The adrenal glands also secrete our sex hormones. So for all of us, that's our testosterone, estrogens, and then progesterone. And in women, once women move into menopause, the ovaries stop making our estrogen, progesterone, and the adrenal glands really take over. So when you think about that in the realm of adrenal fatigue, if a woman has adrenal fatigue and her ovaries aren't capable of making these hormones anymore, that can cause a lot of changes and shifts in her system, and she's really going to feel that. Finally, the adrenal glands also secrete what are called catecholamines, and that's our adrenaline and our noradrenaline. And those are really interesting because they're actually part of our nervous system. So we actually have a little bit of brain tissue in our adrenal glands that secretes these hormones and brain chemicals. So that's pretty cool. And they're gonna come up a lot when we talk about anxiety and blood sugar. Okay. So what do healthy adrenal glands do? We've talked a little bit about this, but really they're responsible for so much of our daily health. They regulate blood sugar, they regulate blood pressure, they help us maintain a healthy metabolism. Cortisol also works very closely with insulin. And when the cortisol balance is off, that's going to shift our insulin balance, and it can move people further down the path of metabolic syndrome and eventually cardiovascular disease if it is allowed to go down the road that far. Our adrenals help to maintain our sleep-wake cycle. Again, that's cortisol's relationship with melatonin. Our adrenal glands help promote immune health, and then they can also help regulate inflammation, and they work with us to minimize chronic inflammation. They support a healthy stress response. Again, that is cortisol. When it's doing its job well, we are resilient to the effects of stress. When cortisol is not doing its job very well, when our adrenals can't keep up, we tend to feel the effects of stress a lot more. And finally, because our adrenal glands work closely, they're part of our endocrine or hormone system, our adrenal glands work closely with our thyroid and then with our sex hormones. So again, if there's an imbalance in our thyroid gland or if there's an imbalance in sex hormone levels, our adrenals are going to try and help keep the balance there. But if the imbalance is allowed to go on in any one of those areas, eventually something's got to give. So we start to see an imbalance. Okay, so if you look at slide 7, I wanted to include that it's the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And that's important because it just demonstrates how our adrenal glands regulate themselves. The hypothalamus and the pituitary are part of our brain. And when our adrenal glands are pumping out their hormones, the hormones will travel through our bloodstream up to our brain, and our brain says, okay, we've got enough of those. So it kind of dampens our adrenal glands' production of those hormones. Now, when we feel the effects of chronic stress, there's a big thought process that goes along with stress, right? Like when you feel it, and there are generally some thoughts that go along with that. And that will literally affect our brain's function. And that is part of what can throw off our adrenal glands' production of hormones. And also, when we move into a state of adrenal fatigue, that's not just happening in our adrenals, it's also happening up in our brains. So that's why when we talk about adrenal fatigue, we talk a lot about the HPA axis, and that's what that is. So what do our adrenal glands need to be healthy? Really, it's about the basics. When we're good to ourselves, our adrenal glands will be good to us, basically. So a regular schedule, our adrenal glands, because they regulate our sleep-wake cycle, they very much respond to changes in our circadian rhythm. Changes in our regular schedule will affect the hormone balance of our adrenal glands. So when I work with people who are trying to heal their adrenal glands, getting a regular schedule of daily activities, including exercise and food intake, is really, really important. The other big piece there is a regular sleep schedule. So those 3 things are really important to help regulate your adrenal gland health. Again, sleep, really important. Both having a regular sleep schedule and then also getting quality sleep is really important as well for a lot of reasons. So when people aren't sleeping well and they have adrenal issues, getting them to sleep well is something that we definitely spend some time working on. Stress management, of course. Stress is going to literally stress out your adrenal glands and cause them to want to produce more hormones, and they need time to rest. So finding ways to manage stress appropriately is really important as far as healing adrenal glands. Again, rest. Time outside in the sun, this is interesting, but it's actually really important for our adrenal glands. Again, we go back to the circadian rhythm. We go back to how are we sleeping. And because we have evolved outside. Our ancestors spent most of their time outside. So our bodies are used to our time clocks being set by the sun rising and setting. So getting outside and getting some sun in the morning is actually a very important part of health and healing for us. So again, spending time outside, especially in the morning, is really important. A nice thing for people to do who have the time is after breakfast, going for a walk. For people who have that time flexibility in their schedule, it's a great way to wake up and to help your adrenal glands get regulated. Lots of healthy, nutrient-rich foods. Food is one of my favorite things to talk about. So I do spend a lot of time with people working on diet, working on increasing, getting more nutrient-dense foods into their diet. That's mostly going to be fruits and veggies, healthy fats, and healthy lean proteins. And the last one, self-love and play. And this is really important because I think we live in a culture that allows us to forget about ourselves and to put other people and other demands and other things first. And we're not really going to get better, especially with lifestyle measures, until we learn to prioritize ourselves and our health. And this is a lesson, I think, for most of us. And I see myself as being, somebody who to remind people of that as they're working to get better. Okay, let's dive just a little bit more into this. So what do our adrenal glands need to be healthy? Again, regular schedule and sleep. We did talk a lot about that already. But the take home here is that when our schedule is erratic, our adrenals are going to continue. They're going to pump out cortisol. They're going to pump out those stimulating hormones to try and help us meet the demands of our schedule. And what that'll do is it'll shift the cortisol-melatonin balance. And when we have more cortisol and less melatonin in our system, we're not sleeping as well. It'll cause insomnia. Cortisol is the hormone that rises in the morning and it helps to wake us up. Melatonin is the hormone that should rise in the evening and help us sleep. But if our cortisol levels stay high during the day, then we don't get that signal that it's time for bed. The other thing to keep in mind is with altered cortisol levels is a shift in blood sugar levels, which we often see. Cortisol's job is also to raise blood sugar. Insulin is a hormone that helps lower blood sugar. But when we have more cortisol in our system, it's going to keep our blood sugar levels high because it thinks that, we're under stress. We need more energy. So it's trying to help us meet the demands of our daily life. Unfortunately, high blood sugar levels will eventually cause things like metabolic syndrome and even cardiovascular disease if it's allowed to go on long enough. And then slide 10 is an image that I wanted to share with you. This is from a salivary cortisol test. I do a lot of cortisol testing to look at adrenal gland function. And I included it because I wanted you to see, again, that cortisol levels shift throughout the day. Cortisol levels should be highest in the morning because that's what wakes us up. That's what tells us to wake up and get out of bed. So again, cortisol levels rise in response to the sun outside, for example, which is why it's nice to get some sun in the morning. And then they start to fall throughout the day. And that's because our body needs less of that stimulating energy from cortisol throughout the day. It should be lowest in the evening, and as it lowers, our melatonin levels rise. And that's what, again, sends us to sleep. If you look at that image, the green curve that you see is, the quote-unquote ideal level of, or ideal cortisol curve. But a lot of people, unfortunately, because of the demands of our daily life, when they come to me, they're outside of that curve. So again, what do our adrenal glands need to be healthy? Diet. Two big things to keep in mind here. This is the big diet takeaway for adrenal health. Number one, lots of fruits and veggies because that's where we get our antioxidants. Antioxidants lower inflammation, which gives our adrenal glands a break. And also, our adrenal glands require a lot of nutrients to stay healthy, and those are most abundant in fruits and vegetables. The second big takeaway for diet and adrenal health is regulating your blood sugar. So eating regular meals throughout the day and having foods that have lots of fiber and healthy amounts of fat. Those are the two best nutrients to keep your blood sugar steady. When you're on the blood sugar roller coaster, your adrenals follow suit. So when your blood sugar levels stay nice and steady, your adrenal glands get that rest. Specifically, as far as nutrients for the adrenal glands, they need a lot of B vitamins. Magnesium is another big nutrient for the adrenal glands for their health. Adrenal glands use a lot of zinc, as well as some other trace minerals. And our adrenal glands also need a lot of vitamin C. We actually store vitamin C in our adrenal glands. We don't really store vitamin C anywhere else in our bodies. And I hope this isn't too much for folks, but I think it's really interesting, and it really illustrates this idea that there's some cultures, for example, Eskimo cultures, that did not have access to many fresh fruits and vegetables, would actually consume the adrenal glands of their prey, and that was how they stayed healthy and avoided scurvy. So we have a lot of vitamin C in our adrenal glands. And again, antioxidants. So keeping your antioxidant level up is really important. Yeah?
What does that mean?
What does what mean?
Antioxidants, where do you get those?
Great question. So antioxidants come from our diet. An antioxidant is any compound that prevents oxidation. So oxidation is, generally speaking, it's cell damage. And we want to avoid that. And the best way to avoid that is by getting antioxidants. Antioxidants are mostly vitamins, and there's some other compounds that are not considered vitamins, but what they do is they protect our cells from that damage.
And they are?
There are lots. Vitamin C is a big antioxidant. Vitamin E is an antioxidant. Vitamin A is an antioxidant. There are a lot of compounds. If you've ever heard of resveratrol, which is the big compound in red wine, is an antioxidant. A lot of the colors that come from fruits and veggies, the colors are antioxidants. So that's why blueberries are so good for us. That's why oranges are so good for us, and cherries, and all the colored foods that we eat. That's why people say to eat a rainbow, because you're getting a bunch of antioxidants. Thank you, that was a good question. So moving forward, adrenal fatigue. What is adrenal fatigue? And if you guys don't mind skipping ahead and looking at slide 15, I just wanted to illustrate this really quickly. Slide 15 shows health and then disease. And I think this is an important concept because adrenal fatigue is not actually, it's definitely not a state of health, but it's also not technically a disease, right? And our modern medical field tends to look at people as either being healthy or being sick with no in between. We don't really know how to recognize an in between. But there's this branch of medicine, functional medicine, that says, no, there are different states. And so if you look at slide 16, it illustrates the idea of health, disease, and then this kind of in-between state where you're not really sick, but you're not as healthy as you could be, and you're feeling the effects of that. And that is a functional imbalance. And what that means basically is that while your blood tests may all look normal, there's definitely still something off because you're not feeling good, you're not feeling healthy. And so adrenal fatigue is definitely considered a functional imbalance because it's not a disease. You don't have altered blood work. You don't have blood work that just shows that you're sick. But again, you're not feeling healthy. And correcting any kind of functional imbalance always requires lifestyle therapies first. That's why I talk so much about sleep, stress management, diet with people. And when we can identify these functional imbalances and we can correct them, it often stops people from moving further down the road towards developing some kind of disease, actual, disease where you're seeing illness and you're seeing objective changes in blood work. Slide 17, it goes a little bit more into what is adrenal fatigue. So it's kind of a hot topic because the term itself is contested. Adrenal fatigue is not actually a state of tired adrenal glands. Our adrenal glands are pretty amazing. They can respond really well to chronic stress because that's what they do. They've kept us, they're trying really hard to keep us alive. More often, adrenal fatigue is about a tired person. It's not tired adrenal glands, it's a tired person. And that person's body has been trying for so long to stay in a state where it can meet the demands of its daily stresses that the brain has started to shut down adrenal function for whatever reason. So again, it goes back to that HPA axis. It's all about the chronic stresses wearing you down to a point where your brain says, okay, we have too much cortisol, we have too much adrenaline, we need to dampen this response. So again, it's a functional response to a chronic issue. And our adrenal glands will be able to re-regulate, they will be able to heal. It just takes the proper care. It takes all those lifestyle changes and it takes a commitment to yourself to get better. And I wanted to compare and contrast adrenal fatigue with Addison's disease, which is actually a disease state of the adrenal glands where it's an autoimmune condition, so the adrenal glands actually start to break down and they can't make cortisol anymore. And that can actually cause a medical emergency. So that would be considered the disease state. It would be in that little red box versus adrenal fatigue, which is just a functional change over time in a person whose adrenal glands have the capacity to heal. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So do stressed out adrenal glands lead to Addison's disease, or is it something?
Generally not. Addison's disease is an autoimmune condition, so it's immune mediated.
So if you had too much cortisol, that means you're not, because you said that if you didn't produce cortisol, then you're prone, or you can get Addison's disease. Is that how? Or did I misunderstand?
No, Addison's disease is an autoimmune condition, so it's where our bodies attack our adrenal glands and they basically destroy the tissue, so it can never be functional again. When we move into a state of adrenal fatigue, that's usually because our adrenal glands have been making more cortisol because they see that we're under a lot of stress. And over time, those high cortisol levels are going to tell our brain that we have too much cortisol. So the brain's going to send a message down to our adrenal glands and say, stop producing so much cortisol. So that is a progression of a functional state, a functional condition. And it has nothing to do with our adrenal glands not being able to work. It just means that they're getting a message to stop working. Yeah, and again, with the proper care, they will come back and start working again beautifully. Yeah.
Is there a test? How do you test to find out if your adrenals are tired or if you've gone beyond that?
Great question. We will talk a little bit about adrenal testing, absolutely. In the functional medicine world, there are different tests that you can do. There's urinary testing and salivary testing. There are also blood tests, but generally speaking, they really don't give us the information that we're looking for. And I'll show you the difference between adrenal and salivary tests.
And you maybe want to talk about this. So initially, when someone's in adrenal fatigue, there's going to be elevated cortisol levels. Eventually, will they have depleted levels? If that goes on for a long time?
Yes. some practitioners recognize different stages of adrenal fatigue, and that's where it starts to get a little bit complicated because the hormone levels all shift in relation to each other, and so you kind of have to meet the person at the level at which they're at.
But the lack of cortisol is where I might be going, gosh, I'm so tired, I can't wake up. That if the cortisol is shut off in the morning, like you said, it's supposed to rise in the morning, that's going to be one of the symptoms that will show for the person. Is that
Yes.
Okay.
And that's pretty far down the road. Once we start seeing those chronically low cortisol levels, that person's been under a lot of stress for a long time.
Got it. Interesting.
Yeah. So signs and symptoms of adrenal fatigue, basically across the board, our adrenal hormones affect every system in our body. There are a lot of crossovers between adrenal fatigue and conditions like PTSD, chronic fatigue syndrome, and metabolic syndrome is another big one. I also sometimes see some adrenal issues with fibromyalgia. So a lot of crossover there. Because the adrenal glands also work on inflammation and inflammation levels in our body, we can also see crossover between adrenal dysfunction and autoimmune conditions, chronic pain conditions, thyroid conditions, that's another big one. By the time we see thyroid disorders, a lot of times we can expect to see adrenal issues as well.
I think it would be helpful to explain metabolic syndrome.
I'm sorry?
I think it would be helpful to explain metabolic syndrome.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So metabolic syndrome is it's a term that we use to describe people whose metabolism is not functioning optimally. These people who have metabolic syndrome are not, they don't have type 2 diabetes at the time. However, they're probably on the road to type 2 diabetes. It's a conglomeration of things that include abdominal weight gain, which is a big symptom of cortisol excess, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, and again, they don't have diabetes, but they're kind of heading down the road. And then the chronic inflammation is another piece in metabolic syndrome. So again, it's a constellation of things. Any other questions about that? No? Okay. So signs and symptoms, again, they can be across the board, but a lot of times what I hear are issues of having no energy during the day, and yet insomnia at night. That's a big thing. It's the wired but tired phase. And people are just kind of trying to get through their day. But then at nighttime, they get a second wind, if you will, and it just keeps people up, keeps them out of bed, keeps them from falling asleep. There's a lot of tossing and turning in bed that happens at this time. Again, that abdominal weight gain is another big one in adrenal fatigue, brain fog, and depression. We'll talk a little bit about how the adrenals can affect mood and brain function. Again, blood sugar issues. Blood sugar can be either too high or too low depending on what the person is eating and what their adrenal hormone levels are at the time. Appetite changes. There can be a lot of loss of interest and loss of pleasure in a person's daily life. People are just trying to make it through, and it really robs them of their joy. And that's a really sad side of adrenal fatigue. A lot of people also have sugar and salt cravings. And that, again, is our bodies are trying to get the energy that they need. They're trying to get the things that they need, but they're not getting it. They're not able to make it themselves anymore.
Is adrenal fatigue missed a lot of the times? And like a lot of this sounds like almost depression or something else.
Yeah, exactly.
So it seems like it would be hard to pinpoint it.
Absolutely. And that's why it's important to really suss out what is going on for the person. Is it that their mood and their apathy and their lack of pleasure is simply a neurotransmitter issue? Is it simply a brain chemistry issue? Or is there something going on in other parts of their body that's causing this, and it's manifesting as depression or anxiety, because those can both come with adrenal fatigue, and we'll talk a little bit about that too.
Could you have, so I'm thinking back on my own life, as a young person having sugar, salt cravings, are there other reasons we might have something like that? Or is it always related to adrenals? Or can it be like you just grew up with a certain diet and that's how your family eats and then you started eating like that, and then it's like if you eat sugar, then you know what I mean, your cells seem to want sugar, want it. But
Yeah.
I'm just curious, are there other reasons that people might have something like that, or is it usually always connected to adrenals?
That's a great question. There can be other reasons that cause it, especially when we look at sugar cravings and digestion and leaky gut and candida and dysbiosis and all of those things that are going on. We also need to look at how much is the person eating, because sometimes they crave sugar and salt because they're just not getting enough calories. But ultimately, we are interconnected beings, so ultimately we will start seeing issues in the adrenal glands. Yeah. It might just be that those aren't initially what are causing the cravings.
Okay.
So adrenal fatigue and weight gain. Again, we've talked a lot about how adrenal fatigue can affect blood sugar levels, but just going back to that, it's so important to keep our blood sugar levels regulated to support adrenal health. When we have chronically high blood sugar levels, we're just going to gain weight. We're just going to store that extra sugar as fat. And again, cortisol and insulin have a relationship with each other. And when cortisol goes high, the insulin response is dampened. When cortisol goes high, we get more blood sugar in our systems. The insulin's not around to take the blood sugar out of our blood. And so our body responds by pulling it out and making more fat cells. So that's part of the way that insulin or that cortisol can contribute to that abdominal weight gain, which is typically where we see it.
So then with women, there's this thing when you go through menopause, then you get this little belly, right? A lot of women get a belly. Is that the correlation there?
That's a big part of it. We also have to think about female hormones. And our fat's actually very metabolically active. And so fat on our bodies, fat cells will actually affect hormone levels. And our fat cells will create different forms of estrogen. So a lot of times when women go through menopause, it's just our body's response to try and keep adequate levels of estrogens around in our system. The other piece there, again, is the cortisol, which can cause resistant weight gain. So even if a person is exercising and they're trying to eat well, they might have a hard time losing that weight. So adrenal fatigue and mood swings. This is coming back to the idea that a lot of times adrenal fatigue looks like anxiety and it looks like depression. We're going to see how adrenal fatigue, mood swings, and brain fog are all really connected. The big picture here for both of these conditions, mood swings, brain fog, is that chronically high cortisol levels will eventually change our brain structure and function. If you think again about the HPA axis, where cortisol is very active in our brains, chronically high cortisol is going to alter the brain starting right there at the HPA axis. And the other piece that I think about with adrenal fatigue and anything cognitive, so again, mood swings, brain fog, is what's the person's inflammation status? Do they have leaky gut? Inflammation, again, is very much correlated with adrenal health and cortisol levels. If you look at slide 21, you'll see I've included some information for you. I don't want to just read through that. But you'll see basically that cortisol levels, as far as depression goes, we can have high cortisol levels, and that can manifest as depression. We can also have low cortisol levels, and that will manifest as depression as well. They're just slightly different forms of depression that can show up. So, yes?
Sorry, I have a question. You might cover it later on, but how do you measure a person's inflammation status?
That's a great question. There are some very good specialized tests out there that look really at inflammation in the cardiovascular system. We do have some very general blood work that can be run. It's just not very
Definitive.
yeah, for the most part, I don't see that those levels change very much. That's why I do a lot of work symptomatically with people. The other piece, mood swings and anxiety and adrenal function. This goes back to, if we think again about low blood sugar and adrenal function, our adrenals aren't just pumping out cortisol, they're also pumping out adrenaline to help regulate blood sugar. And so when our blood sugar crashes, our adrenals pump out adrenaline, and so what happens? Our heart starts to race, we start to breathe more shallowly, we start to develop those anxiety physical symptoms, which also manifest for a lot of people in mental anxiety as well. So again, anxiety, adrenal health, blood sugar, it's all just so related.
I don't know if you're going to talk about this later, but the American diet having so much added sugar in it, and I know sugar, I've been kind of reading about the evils of sugar for several years now, with the effect that it has on inflammation especially, so that can't be helping your adrenal glands either. And how does that fit in with the intake of excess sugar? How does that fit in with these symptoms that you're discussing?
Right, great question. When I work with people to heal their adrenal glands, I ask them to stop eating sugar. And some people actually also need to stop eating grains, because any kind of simple carbohydrates
Is sugar.
and it's going to disrupt the balance of our blood sugar, which is going to stress out our adrenal glands. I'm really sad to see how many chemicals are in our food supply and how much sugar is in our food supply, and that people aren't told about this, that people aren't educated about this, because if we could just eat fruits and vegetables and healthy fats and healthy proteins and get the herbs and the vitamins and the minerals that we need in our diet, I think we would be so much healthier than we are today. I might be out of a job, but yeah, that's a great question. Sugar is a major culprit in adrenal health and imbalance. Again, adrenal fatigue and brain fog, this is just another manifestation of those chronically high cortisol levels, the altered brain function, and then inflammation is the other big piece here. So cleaning up the diet is really important, and getting the inflammation levels down as we're helping to regulate adrenal glands. And you had asked earlier about adrenal testing, so we'll talk about that for just a moment. Again, I use two different types of testing, the salivary, 24-hour salivary cortisol testing, or 24-hour urine cortisol testing. And they both are going to look at the adrenal curve throughout the day. And I use them for different reasons. I tend to use the salivary testing as a general picture for people because saliva shows us how much cortisol is available in our tissues. I also use salivary testing for a lot of female hormones because, again, it shows us, it's a more reliable marker of how much of the hormone is actually available to our tissues, to our bodies throughout the day. Again, blood is just a quick snapshot, and I don't find it to be a very clinically useful tool. So again, you see the salivary cortisol curve. It's going to look a lot like the urine cortisol curve, but it should be highest in the morning and lowest in the evening. Slide 24 is an example of a urine cortisol curve. And you see again, it's a little bit different because it's lower in the morning and then it kind of peaks in the afternoon. And that's because throughout the day, our cortisol is still in our tissues in the morning, but it starts to be broken down and then we start to excrete it through urine. So that's why we see a urine curve that's a little bit different than the salivary curve. I like urine testing and I use it when I need a little bit more information because it can show us not only cortisol levels, but also some of the metabolites of cortisol. So if I need a little bit more information about what is going on with a person and how they're actually using these hormones, I'll use the urine testing. Okay, so let's move on to the fun part. Let's talk about how we get better, how we help our adrenals stay healthy.
Can I ask just one question before
Of
we
course.
leave that slide?
Yeah.
So my recollection, I've been thinking back on this, like even when I used to work in the industry, just work in Boston when I was a younger woman. There's this sort of thing where and I don't know if it's a circadian rhythm, but we get up, we get going with our day, we're involved, we eat our lunch maybe anytime between 12 to 1:30, but then there's a definite crash, or it seems like a crash in the afternoon. I mean, I remember it as a 28-year-old woman, and I definitely see it now. And then again it pops back up like around 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock. What is that again? Is that also, because if cortisol goes down, and the melatonin comes up in the evening, what again happens right in that kind of 2 to 4:30 window? What's happening?
Right, great question. And functional medicine would say that's actually not ideal. That's not actually a sign of adrenal health, because usually that's a response to eating carbs in the diet, because carbs are going to pull the cortisol levels down. They're going to bump the insulin levels up. Okay. That makes us tired. Also, again, just general fatigue. If you do have that adrenal fatigue condition, it's a functional response of our bodies. And when I work with people to help get their levels regulated and help get them feeling better, and clean up their diet, that's such a big one. A lot of people stop having that midday slump.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And one thing, if people are experiencing that, one thing that I ask them to do is to try not eating carbs for breakfast and lunch, and then, getting most of their carbs actually at night, which is sort of a different approach than a lot of other, what a lot of other diets are saying, especially if you look at paleo or keto. But that can help regulate cortisol levels, is eating most of your carbs at night. That's going to pull your cortisol level down. Yeah, especially for people who get that midday slump.
But don't vegetables have carbs or no?
They do. Not all of them. Not all of them. There are a lot of lists out there of low carb veggies. The ones that I would say hold off until dinner would be like the root veggies. And then beans are another big source of carbs that we don't often think of. So root veggies and beans are great dinner options.
What do you think about the intermittent fasting in terms of this, kind of trying to limit your intake to maybe, 6 to 8 hours of the day and then taking that longer break?
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that would fit in today?
I don't use a lot of intermittent fasting with people unless they are very drawn to it. And if that's the case, I say eat your breakfast by 10 a.m. because our adrenals need food by 10 a.m. And then you have that 8-hour window, have your dinner at 6, but then eat a snack at night before bed. Because if you are, if you're not eating for 14 hours, and if you have adrenal dysfunction, you're probably waking up in the middle of the night and you don't know why. And you're probably not feeling hungry, but your blood sugar might have just crashed. And that's gonna wake you up. It's that adrenaline response. So for people who are doing intermittent fasting and have adrenal issues or are waking up in the middle of the night, I ask them to eat a snack before bed.
That's exactly what's happening to me.
Yeah.
Every night I wake up between 2 and 3:30.
Yeah.
Wide awake.
Yeah.
Yeah, me
That's
too.
so
And that's
hard.
new. That's like within the past month. I used to always have trouble falling asleep. Now I take all kinds of stuff, so I practically, you know, I'm in a daze when I go to bed and I fall asleep just fine, and then 3 o'clock I'm like up,
Yeah,
and it's just a recent thing.
yeah, yeah.
Because I can't get back to sleep. I'm done. Once I get up, that's it. I'm up at 3 in the morning. I have to go till 9.
Yeah, it's awful. I mean, it
Yeah.
ruins your
It
day.
does.
We'll talk about some other things that I recommend for people just to help with sleep and help with regulating that. But again, I recommend for people to try, you know, a little snack before bed, fat and fiber.
Could you just give a couple foods, just an avocado or?
Avocado is a great option. Nut butter is a great option. Yeah, so a little bit of nut butter on a little bit of fruit, a banana, a little slice of toast, something. I'm sorry?
It's like a banana and peanut butter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That sounds really good.
It's a nice little nighttime ritual. So let's talk a little bit more about some nutrients specifically for adrenal health. Now, again, B vitamins are really important for our adrenal glands, and when we're under a lot of stress, we need a lot of B vitamins. Specifically, our adrenals like B5, which is pantothenic acid, vitamin B6, and niacinamide, which is B3, I believe. Generally speaking, a B complex is great for people. Vitamin C, again, our adrenal glands are storing and using a ton of vitamin C, so that is an important nutrient for us. Zinc is important for adrenal health. Magnesium is another really important one, and that is a nutrient that I often recommend that people take before bed to help sleep. Magnesium and B6 specifically can help with sleep, but you don't want to do too much of the B6.
Like calm, have you ever heard of calm?
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Magnesium.
citrate. Is that okay?
Magnesium citrate is great. Magnesium glycinate is also a really nice option because the glycinate form of magnesium is also conducive to sleep. Yeah.
Is there a multi-supplement that would take a lot of these vitamins in? You could kind of not have 16 different bottles, you know?
There are a lot out there. A lot of adrenal supports, and they all have different things in them. So
Do you have any you recommend through your practice?
I do, and it depends on the person. Some of them actually have adrenal complex in them, so they actually have adrenal gland in them. And that I use only for people who really need that. Other people just need the specific vitamins and minerals without the adrenal cortex, which is important.
Are we going to talk about which herbs like we can use to
Yes.
for those specific nutrients?
Not for those nutrients, really, but for conditions, yeah.
If you're just low on vitamin C, can that throw the whole thing out of whack too? I mean, I didn't know until you told us this morning that the adrenals hold so much vitamin C. So if you've been not supplementing or not drinking your orange juice or whatever because it has the added sugar, does that throw it out of whack too? Just the one thing?
It could. And again, with vitamin C, if a person has a lot of inflammation going on, their vitamin C levels are going to be low. So getting those levels up is really, really important. Again, trace minerals. Our bodies just need a lot of minerals, and we live in a pretty mineral deficient society as far as our diets go. So a lot of people benefit from a trace mineral complex. And finally, chromium. Chromium I use when people have blood sugar issues. Chromium helps to work with insulin to kind of open the doors and get blood sugar out of our bloodstream. So for people who have high blood sugar, chromium can be a great option. The one thing, what I will say about both magnesium and vitamin C is that when you get too much of it, it can cause loose stool. So that's one side effect to watch out for. Just a heads up. Okay, so let's talk about some herbs. I've broken this down into a few different categories of herbs, and I wanted to start by talking about adaptogens. Is everyone familiar with the term adaptogen? No? Okay. So an adaptogen is kind of an amazing group of herbs. They're herbs that really help to adapt to what is going on in our body. So they're very changeable. They can really meet us where we are and help to correct imbalances. So when we have a functional issue like adrenal fatigue, we need to use adaptogens because they're a lot smarter than we are and they can help us regulate. They can work not only at the adrenal glands, but they also can provide feedback support to the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, which is really pretty cool. So they really work all over our body, again, to regulate. They can be given for a period of time to help a person get through the healing process. They also can be used more long-term because a lot of adaptogens are pretty safe. And we'll talk about some big contraindications for the adaptogens I'll discuss today. Adaptogens were generally used by soldiers after battle in a lot of ancient cultures because they helped people recover from the stress of battle. And if you think about today, a lot of our soldiers and our veterans are coming back with PTSD. So potentially good candidates for adaptogens. And really anybody who suffers from PTSD may be a good candidate for an adaptogen or two. They can provide us energy if we're running really low. They can also help us to relax if we're too wired, which they're just really cool herbs. They also can support mood, they support fertility, they support blood sugar balance. So again, they're really working on all levels. And some adaptogens that I really like are, we'll start with, where is it? Ashwagandha, it's right over here. And that is, I think of it as a master adrenal herb. It is a great adrenal tonic. It's a great adaptogen. So it's really, really beautiful for coming in and helping a person regulate not only an adrenal imbalance, but also a thyroid imbalance. So it really works at both of those levels beautifully. Ashwagandha is anti-inflammatory. So it can also help kind of calm that inflammation response as we're getting cortisol levels regulated. Finally, ashwagandha can help to regulate blood sugar levels, which is pretty cool. We'll talk about this on the next slide as well, but ashwagandha, the one thing that I watch out for with ashwagandha is people who have nightshade allergies. Nightshades are the tomato, potato, eggplant, pepper family. So if a person is sensitive to those foods, they're not going to be a good candidate for ashwagandha because ashwagandha is also in that family. The next herb is astragalus. So it comes in a couple different forms. It comes like this, and you can just mix it as part of a tea, which Suzanne has a really beautiful blend here. It also comes, the root can also be sliced, and if you are a big cook and you like to make soups, this is a great form to use astragalus because you can just throw a couple of these little tongue depressors in with your soup and let it cook for a few hours, and that's a great way to get some of the medicinal benefits. Astragalus is a master anti-aging herb, so that's great. It also can help strengthen immunity and can help protect against allergies. For people who are using it to support immunity and to protect against allergies, it really should be taken before the onset of allergy season. So you really want to you need to think about strengthening your body prior to when you usually have allergies. It's a really cool herb in Chinese medicine as well. In Chinese medicine, they use it a lot for both digestive issues and as a qi tonifier. So if you have low energy, it's going to help support energy production. And again, it works on the lungs too. So Chinese medicine, that's immunity and that's allergies. Bacopa, I don't think I pulled that one down. Bacopa is another really wonderful herb. It is also an adaptogen, but I use it a lot, again, for people with thyroid issues and then for cognitive issues. People who are really suffering from brain fog and memory issues. Bacopa is a great herb for that. Another one, mushrooms. Mushrooms, there's a whole family of mushrooms, and Suzanne has a great shelf up here of medicinal mushrooms. A lot of, it's, yeah, right behind you guys. A lot of mushrooms are adaptogens, and they work on a lot of different levels. So some of the mushrooms are better for cognitive health. Lion's mane is a great herb for brain health. Some mushrooms are great for energy support. So chaga, even reishi might be a good one for that. For immune health and heart health, I also think of reishi. And shiitake is actually, there are a lot of studies both on shiitake and turkey tail for immune health and for its anti-cancer properties. I actually worked in a cancer clinic for a few years where we did a lot of work with turkey tail, so that's a really great herb as well. Mushrooms, again, they do tend to work on the immune system, so all of them can be immune supportive, and many of them have anti-aging properties as well, which is also great. Let's see. For people who are really kind of wired all the time, having a hard time going to sleep, I use some calming herbs. Passion flower is a great herb that I use for sleep. People who have a lot of anxiety, a lot of overwork, it's hard to kind of shut your mind down. I'll use passion flower. Usually at night, I would recommend a tincture because I don't want people drinking a lot of tea right before bed. Tea can be a diuretic, and so if you're getting up at night to use the restroom, then that's kind of defeating the purpose. So passion flower tincture can be a great option.
What about ground made into capsules?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. For me, it's just about making sure that people aren't drinking too much, getting too many fluids before bed. Another nice thing about passion flower is that for people who have a lot of muscle spasms, if you think of like restless legs at night, passion flower can help calm some of that. So it can be a nice addition, especially with things like magnesium. Finally, passion flower is kind of cool because it has been studied a lot to help people who have addictions, especially with alcohol and benzodiazepines, which are a lot of those calming substances. They're depressants. People who develop a dependence on those and need to get away from them have used passion flower to help with that. There have been some studies on that, and it shows that it works pretty well. It's generally pretty safe, which is great. It does have some chemical compounds in it that can potentially, this is really just theoretical, I haven't seen it, but you don't want to give too much of for a long period of time. So usually passion flower is a great herb to take for a period of months, and then you take a little bit of a break from it. But again, it's great. So when I think of passion flower, I think of trouble going to bed at night, kind of anxious, overworked, can't shut their mind down, can't shut their muscles off. And then I also give magnesium with passion flower. Schizandra is one of my other favorite herbs. Have you guys ever tried this? Mm-hmm. No? In Chinese medicine, it's called 5-flavor berry because they say it has all 5 flavors in it: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. And it's definitely an intense flavor. But it's pretty magical plant, I think. Schizandra is a great herb, another great herb to use for people who are having a hard time sleeping. It helps decrease levels of stress hormones, which we've seen in some studies. Again, it helps to calm anxiety and put people to sleep. Chinese medicine, again, has used it for thousands of years. And in Chinese medicine, they say that it's kind of a gathering herb. So if your energy is all over the place, you think of being really anxious, you think of your mind going a mile a minute, you think of going through your to-do list, for example, your thoughts are not with your body. Schisandra is an herb that helps to gather you back together at night so you can fall asleep, if that makes sense.
So how would you take that?
It's available in a lot of different forms. Again, a tincture. Do you have a tincture form here? Yeah, I would use a tincture form. There are some really beautiful Chinese formulas that contain Schisandra that help people sleep. One of them that I use is, it's called Swanzao Ren, SUANZAOREN, and I use that a lot. That is specific for women who who are going through or have gone through menopause, who are all of a sudden up all night, and especially if they have palpitations. That's a big one because, again, it's gathering that energy back in so that you can sleep. Let's see. Schisandra also supports endurance. So even though it is an herb that helps sleep, it is kind of a long-term qi tonifier and supports healthy vision, and it also has been studied for liver health. So it's a great liver herb.
For sleep, do you dose it before bedtime, or
I'm sorry?
when you're using Schisandra for sleep, do you dose it before bedtime or throughout the day?
I actually, no, I will use it throughout the day quite often because it's so good for us. For people who have any kind of liver concern, and again, with that mile-a-minute thinking, that's another thing that I think of for Schisandra. So it depends. Sometimes I just use it before bed. Mm-hmm. But it's a great herb for, to take all day. So again, when we're working with the adrenals, we oftentimes use the adaptogens, and those are the regulating herbs. So when we think about a person who kind of has symptoms in the very tired realm and then symptoms in the over anxious wired realm, I would use an herb that's a little bit more regulating. And again, ashwagandha is awesome. That's this guy right here. It's so, yes.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is it contraindicated for pregnancy or breastfeeding? Because I thought that it was, and that's why I haven't
Yeah.
taken it for the past, because I've been pregnant and breastfeeding for 6 years. So.
Yeah, good question. It is contraindicated
Okay.
in pregnancy and breastfeeding. Yeah, that's the one thing about it. But for women who are breastfeeding, there still are a lot of nutrient options that can be
Then
considered.
Finally wean the baby.
Yay.
Start taking it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Just wanted to check.
Of
If
course.
I ever had another one.
Yeah, absolutely. Ashwagandha, again, it's wonderful. Anti-inflammatory, stress-busting herb, just a general endocrine tonic for people who have been worn down for a while. Another herb that I use a lot, and I was just telling Suzanne I use this, I can kind of go pretty hard with it for myself, is rhodiola. Rhodiola is it's a regulating herb, but it can also be stimulating, especially for people who are really worn down. It can help regulate cortisol levels. So for people who have clinically dysfunctional cortisol levels or dysregulated cortisol levels, rhodiola can be a great herb, especially if they're going through that wired but tired experience. As an adaptogen, it helps sort of moderate the effects of chronic stress throughout our body. It supports immune health. It also is really, really good for cardiovascular health. So for people who have that inflammatory metabolic syndrome picture, rhodiola can be really great. I do tend to give it earlier in the day because in a lot of people it raises energy levels. So it's a nice kind of morning and afternoon herb, especially if you're getting that mid-afternoon energy slump. You can do a little bit of rhodiola with your lunch and just kind of get yourself through that. There are some contraindications with rhodiola, just so you guys are aware. It's contraindicated in bipolar disease or bipolar illness, and it's contraindicated in for people who are taking ADHD drugs, because it has a lot of effects on our brain too. It can be really stimulating for the brain, which is why it can also be good for people who have a lot of brain fog, memory issues, concentration issues. So for people who have those brain fog, memory, concentration issues, rhodiola and or bacopa are two great options. I tend to go for rhodiola more when I'm thinking we should address heart health. And then I think of bacopa more if there's also a thyroid picture. But they both will help with brain cognitive function.
I have a question actually about the ashwagandha. Does it make you sleepy or it just improves your sleep? Like if you drink ashwagandha tea in the afternoon, are you going to be woozy? And
So that's such a great question, because ashwagandha, again, it's a regulator. So for most people, it helps meet the imbalance. So for people who are really tired, it can help support energy without causing sleep issues. For other people who are in that wired phase, it can help calm them down without overstimulating them or making them too woozy. Now, I've had some people who have had opposite reactions to ashwagandha.
I just have to see how it works.
Yeah.
Because I know like taking something like valerian actually makes you sleepy when you take it.
Yes.
No matter what time of day.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's not the same with this, or it just depends on the person.
Yeah, generally it's a great regulating herb, but some people have different reactions to it. So I usually start with giving it to people in the morning and the afternoon. And if it makes them tired, then I know that it would be helpful for them in the evening. But I'd rather people be sleeping well. That's why I always start in the morning, because I don't want to mess up a person's sleep cycle. So for people who are really worn down and they're kind of in the very, very tired end of adrenal fatigue, we would consider some stimulating herbs for adrenal health. And a couple of those, one of those is licorice. And we have some licorice, this is the second guy over from the end there. Licorice is a great adrenal herb because it can help mimic cortisol function. So for people who are clinically low in cortisol levels, licorice is a great option to actually help bring those levels up. And that's how it supports the adrenal glands. It's actually helping kind of provide some of that molecule that people are lacking. Licorice is also a digestive tonic. So for people who have a lot of leaky gut going on, a lot of inflammation coming from the GI tract, licorice is a great option. I do use it with dietary changes and with digestive support. A lot of times, licorice is a very cooling herb in Chinese medicine, so it's important to kind of meet that quality with something that's a little bit warming. So you can give licorice with a little bit of ginger or even a little bit of honey if you're doing a licorice tea. Those are both considered more warming in Chinese medicine, so that's how I help people balance that out. Licorice, one thing I will say is that it is contraindicated for people who have high blood pressure. Again, it can act on the adrenal glands, and by stimulating them, it can stimulate us to stimulate our blood pressure to go up. So it's not appropriate for everyone. Another stimulating herb that I like a lot is Eleutherococcus. It's sometimes also called Eleuthero, and that's that last herb down on the end there. And it is a form of ginseng, but it's a little more mild. There are a lot of different forms of ginseng out there, and some of them are really stimulating. Eleuthero tends to be a less stimulating form of ginseng than other forms. Now, some people find it to be too much. However, for a lot of people, it's got that nice balance. It really helps to provide that energy. Again, Chinese medicine is considered a pretty strong qi tonic. So it's tonifying your energy. It can also, in modern studies, it has been shown to lower blood sugar, and it also can help support the immune response. And in Chinese medicine, it is also used to support immune health. Because it is so stimulating, it is one of those herbs we have to make sure isn't overstimulating, that it's not doing its job too well. So I always let people know that sometimes they can experience insomnia or restlessness if they're getting too much Eleuthero, and we just back the dose down at that point. So whenever we're treating a person, we're not just treating the condition, we're treating the person. And adrenal fatigue, again, never is working all by itself. There's usually something else going on that we're also working to support. So again, a lot of times with adrenal fatigue, I also see leaky gut, so we'll do a lot of digestive support as well. And some of the herbs that I will bring in to help with digestive support are ginger. Ginger's one. It is a great stomach herb. So for people who have a lot of digestive issues with their stomachs, a lot of belching, indigestion, easy fullness, just not feeling good right after eating a meal, ginger is a great option. It also can help actually keep the lining of the stomach healthy. So it's a great stomach tonic. For people who get a lot of gas and bloating, I think of either peppermint or chamomile. The peppermint is good also if there are a lot of stomach issues, a lot of that indigestion, just not feeling good after a meal. The peppermint can help with that. I don't use peppermint in people who have heartburn, because peppermint can actually exacerbate heartburn. So that's one thing that you need to be aware of if you want to use it. Finally, chamomile. Chamomile is another great digestive herb. It has a lot of qualities that help support digestion. So it's considered a bitter herb, and bitter herbs all stimulate digestion. So for a person who's just not very hungry, again, who gets full quickly, who has a lot of inflammation, especially, and a lot of anxiety, chamomile is the perfect herb for them, because it works, again, on digestion, and it also has that mentally calming aspect to it. It's a really nice herb to have in the evening after dinner, a few hours before bed. You can have a cup of chamomile tea, and it's great just to help soothe your mind and your body. For people who have a big inflammation picture, especially if there's anything that looks at all autoimmune, I think of turmeric, and I also think of ginger. Turmeric helps for people who have a lot of chronic pain. So if you've got a lot of chronic pain going on, especially a lot of joint pain, turmeric is a great herb. It's also nice short term just to help lower inflammation levels and inflammation status in general. The ginger will do the same thing. I think of ginger, again, when a person's kind of chronically cold, maybe they have some digestive issues, maybe they have hypothyroidism, and hands are always cold, feet are always cold. Ginger is a great herb for that. And again, it's also a really potent anti-inflammatory. For people who have high blood sugar levels, maybe some metabolic syndrome, cinnamon is a great herb. Cinnamon has been studied quite a lot these days and has been shown to lower blood sugar levels. Bitter melon has also been shown to lower blood sugar levels. And then stevia is an herb that I recommend to people who are trying to kick the sugar habit, because it's a really hard habit to kick. And at this point, I think sugar is probably one of the most addictive substances out there. I have stopped drinking caffeine. I used to drink Diet Coke. I remember I had, this was a long time ago, but I remember I was having withdrawal dreams from Diet Coke, which was kind of crazy. And when I stopped eating sugar, I had withdrawal dreams as well. So it's a really strong substance, and people need help and support getting off of sugar. So as we're kind of switching them from a processed diet or from a diet that's high in sugar, I recommend stevia, which provides that really sweet flavor and can give people that satisfaction without raising blood sugar levels. And in fact, stevia can help moderate cravings and moderate blood sugar levels.
there any foods that you can use, like any fruits or something, raisins, or is that way too much sugar? Like if you want to stop all white sugar and you need something sweet.
It's a great question. It depends on what a person's body can handle. If they're at a point where their blood sugar, where their adrenal glands and their pancreas can't keep up with any sugar, having any sugar in their system, then we have to get them off of the sugar. So fruit, especially dried fruit, is not a good option. For other people who are not quite as burned out and who are active, we can say, you know, stick with the fruit, stick with the grains, those are fine, and then root veggies are another nice option. So again, it depends on the person. A lot of times for people who are getting off of sugar, they still need those carbs to feel satisfied. So again, if a person is healthy and they just need a little bit of digestive support when they're getting off of sugar, I recommend, you know, moving to those high carb veggies. So have some sweet potatoes, have some, you know, colored rice for dinner. Have some grains, have some of those carb, starch-rich foods. And that can provide the satisfaction for people. Sweet potatoes are kind of interesting because they can help, and grains too, these healthy grains, they can help produce serotonin, which helps us sleep and helps us feel happy. So as they're getting off of sugar, this really addictive substance, they can eat these other foods that can naturally help promote serotonin production. So I think that's pretty neat. Stevia, one more thing I'll say about it is that it actually has a very bitter flavor. If you use it too much, a little bit goes a really, really, really long way. So I always recommend that people start, if they get the powder, with like a 1/16 of a teaspoon or in a cup of coffee, you know, just a tiny, tiny bit goes a really long way.
I've been using, I'm going to say baking powder, and that's wrong. The chocolate, I'll put a little bit of that in there, the baking cocoa.
Oh, yeah.
There's no, and I looked at the label, there's no sugar in it at all, but it just, I can taste that chocolatey flavor.
Yeah.
I put that in my coffee and it's good.
That's a great idea.
And the cocoa powder is supposedly also good for you.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it's a great antioxidant. Nice.
Yay.
Have you tried any stevia?
Yeah,
Do you like it?
it's okay.
Yeah.
I only use it in kind of plain yogurt instead of honey or the fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fine. I didn't get that bitter flavor. I didn't use too much of it.
Nice. Great.
That's what I used to put. To me, it always tastes, I mean, I know it's natural, but it always tastes like chemicals to me. Maybe I don't care for it one bit. I don't taste the sweet in it. To me, it tastes like, almost like a Diet Coke, that kind of.
That fake sugar. Yeah.
So maybe I'm using too much. I don't know.
It could be. I would recommend trying a little bit less. Some people just don't like it. And for people who really don't like it but still need that support in coming off of sweets, a lot of warming herbs can be good. So cinnamon, cardamom, ginger, those are all nice alternatives. And another nice thing that I like to recommend to people are making fruit and herb kind of syrups, if you will. And you just cook. I get a pack of frozen fruits. So, for example, blueberries, and a little bit of powdered ginger, or a little bit of powdered cardamom. You can put the frozen blueberries on the stove, mix in some of those warm spices, and just simmer it until it kind of thickens. And then you have something that's really natural but still sweet. And you can put it on yogurt. You can put it over, you know, a variety of things. But it's a nice little natural syrup that you have that doesn't have any sugar in it. Yeah, another good blend is raspberry and thyme is really good too. Mm-hmm. Let's see. So calming herbs, to move on, for people who are really just in that wired phase, again, having a hard time relaxing, a hard time calming their mind down, I might use more brain tonic herbs. So some examples of that would be skullcap. Skullcap is a great herb for general cognitive function. It has a lot of great properties, actually. But I use it a lot as a general cognitive tonic. It also has some anti-inflammatory actions. So it's good for general brain health. Melissa is a nice herb. That's another really calming herb. It's also called lemon balm. And it also has a lot of actions on the digestive tract. Almost like chamomile, it can soothe an overactive digestive system and soothe an overactive mind at the same time. And finally, milky oat seed is another really nice, gentle nerve tonic. It's not only going to tonify your brain, but it's going to tonify the rest of your nervous system as well. So that is another good option. Milky oat seed is very, very gentle. It is the kind of herb that you can take for a really long time with no side effects. It is one of those herbs that's safe for kids as well, generally speaking. For women who are going through menopause or just having a hard time or having any kind of hormonal issues, I do think of maca as well, and that is up here too. Maca comes in a few different forms. It's often powdered because it's a root, so it's almost like a food. It's really nutrient rich, and it can help balance women's hormones. It can help with libido. It can help with regulating cycles for women who are still cycling. It has a lot of pre-estrogenic qualities. So it's not an estrogen supplement, but it's helping to support the female hormone system and the estrogen system, which helps a lot of women feel better. So it can help everything from libido to sleep to mood. Yeah.
Does that have an effect on people with endometriosis? Is there like a contradiction?
I would be careful with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would. That's a great question, and that's one that I would actually do a little bit of research on before answering definitively, but at this point I would be careful with it.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, are there any other questions? Anything else I can? Yes.
Maybe it would be helpful if you talk a little bit about timing. In other words, like if I start taking Eleuthero today, am I going to feel better like on Friday?
Sure.
Tomorrow?
Yeah. Yeah, that is a great question. So a lot of herbs. Yeah, no, that's great. For example, eleuthero, licorice, a lot of the stimulating herbs, people start to feel better pretty quickly on those. You know, they start to notice a difference within a few days. And that's why it's important to monitor, because you can kind of cross the threshold into getting too much of the herb. So when you're getting too much, you're feeling overstimulated. You are feeling a little more on the anxious or wired side of things. So it is important to just know when to back off of the herb. So again, generally speaking, with those stimulating ones, they tend to act a little more quickly than some of the other herbs. Herbs like ashwagandha and bacopa, most people notice a difference with those pretty quickly too. I'd say usually within a week or two, definitely within 2 weeks, people are noticing a difference. And they're adaptogens, they're pretty safe, so they're gonna help kind of regulate your system. I don't hear too many people say that they feel like they've overdone it with ashwagandha or bacopa. Mm-hmm.
If someone had high cortisol levels, but their thyroid, they were trying to get that balanced, could you, ashwagandha would be, I was just gonna ask you, what are a couple things that you really would just strongly?
For a person with high cortisol levels and a thyroid imbalance, that's a great question. Lifestyle measures are number one. So diet, sleep, stress management. And then I'd say we'd be pretty careful. I would go the adaptogenic route for sure, because there are a couple of imbalances there, right? And we would need to let the person's body sort it out. So I would probably start with either ashwagandha or bacopa. I would probably start with ashwagandha. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you were talking about the balance with melatonin and cortisol.
Mm-hmm.
So I take melatonin,
Mm-hmm.
fall asleep, and it works great. Am I doing something wrong by taking it every night?
As long as it works for you,
It's not
no.
throwing anything off then?
No,
by
so what it's
supplementing
going to
it?
do, what it does, generally for sleep, melatonin is supplemented at low doses, usually between 0.5 milligram, up to 3. And for sleep, that is a relatively high dose. But what the melatonin does is it tells the cortisol system to calm down. So it's helping to bring down cortisol levels. So I mean, that's a great way to help regulate adrenal glands.
I don't know if I was stopping my own mechanism for slowing it down by supplementing.
No, and that's really the art of medicine, right? It's about being gentle, but using what we have to try and encourage our bodies to get back into balance naturally.
Any examples of how to use maca powder?
Yeah, that's another great question. I use it a lot in smoothies, and that is how I use it these days. I used to take a maca tincture. Yeah, and I just carried that with me, and I would take it in the morning and take it in the afternoon. Suzanne also has some maca capsules on the shelf, and those are also great. Mm-hmm.
How does your acupuncture treatment, does that help support the adrenal function in any way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I use acupuncture for stress management, for sleep support, for mood regulation, and it can also help regulate the HPA axis. And there are a lot of different theories on why that happens. Chinese medicine has its own beliefs about that. Western medicine would say, okay, well, you're working on the sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system balance, and that's helping to regulate the HPA axis. If you're helping someone relax, you're lowering their stress hormones, which is helping their adrenal glands heal. If you're helping them sleep, you're also helping their adrenals heal. So there are a lot of theories about that, but it helps people. Mm-hmm.
Can you touch on the difference identifying high and low cortisol, so like body signs or symptoms that might come up?
Yeah, so body signs and symptoms of high cortisol versus low cortisol. It can be somewhat murky, to be honest, but a lot of times with high cortisol levels, we see a lot of the, if it's been going on for a long time, you can see a lot of that metabolic syndrome picture. So there's a lot of, there can be that abdominal obesity, there can be blood sugar issues, blood pressure issues. They're probably having a really hard time concentrating. They're probably really overactive in their minds. They're definitely not sleeping well. And they might be a little bit too, kind of on that wired side of things. Yeah, people with chronically low cortisol tend to be more on the tired end of things and can present in a lot of different ways, physically speaking. They also might have that metabolic syndrome picture because once we go down the road of metabolic issues, that becomes a little bit harder to change even if cortisol levels kind of start to lower.
What can cause low cortisol?
What usually happens is when we encounter stress for the first time, our adrenal glands, which are healthy, pump out cortisol, and that helps us respond to the stress. But if we are constantly perceiving stress, our adrenal glands are going to eventually get to a point where our brain's saying we have too much cortisol in our system, stop making so much cortisol. So our adrenal glands get that message and they start to lower production.
That makes sense, thank you.
Yeah.
So the chronic stress causes it to eventually to go up.
It causes dysregulation, yeah, long term. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else I can answer for you?
Well, we're on the sleep thing.
Sure.
So when I get up at 2 or 3 in the morning, because I'm seeing how effective sleep is for helping all this, and I can't sleep.
Yeah.
So when I wake up in the night, is there something? Should I take another melatonin?
I wouldn't at that point. No, generally.
Or just get up and just deal with it.
Well, it kind of depends. There's that whole realm of sleep hygiene. Have you ever heard of that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So staying in the dark, cool room, and if you're up for more than 20 minutes, generally it's a good idea to get out of bed. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But some people do really well with having a little herbal tincture next to them in bed, and they can take a little bit and fall back asleep. At that point, I would stick with either herbal remedies or something homeopathic so that you're not affecting, your body's balance of melatonin and cortisol in the middle of the night.
Because it's just bizarre because I'll sleep, I don't have too many problems falling asleep. I take the melatonin and I fall asleep. The problem is I'm just getting up so early. So I don't know, do I go to bed at 6 o'clock? And then that way when I get up at 3, I've got my 8 or 9 hours. Maybe that's the
Hopefully not. Yeah, hopefully not. Again, it really depends on what's waking you up. For some people, it's low blood sugar. For some people, it's that their cortisol starts to shoot up at that point. For other people, there's just a variety of reasons.
And I know I'm a woman of a certain age, so I'm going through the, and it's, the sweats and that kind of thing too. Maybe it's a combination of all of it.
I'm sure it is, yeah. And so your adrenals are definitely affected by all of that. So there are a lot of moving parts there.
I like the snack idea, the little snack idea.
Yeah.
Because I try to not eat after 6 o'clock, because I always told if you do that, don't eat after 6, it affects your sleep, or you can put weight on it.
That's why I think a little snack, I think it's actually important to get that in. Yeah. Nothing big, not like a whole sandwich, but
Full ice cream.
Yeah, maybe not that.
The tinctures, I'm not sure how they have them here, but I've had tinctures before, and they have, they're alcohol based, and that affects me. So is there something, an alternative?
Yeah. So there are some capsule forms of a lot of these herbs. There are also products called glycerites, which are alcohol free, and rather than having alcohol in them, they have glycerin and water. And some of them have water, some don't, I think. Is that accurate, Suzanne? Or they?
Usually there's water as well.
Okay. The glycerin is really, really sweet. So it can be like a nice little treat too. But aren't there Shazandra glycerites?
Almost.
I think I've seen that.
You can find it in the desert. If you have the ashwagandha or the fish food, you might include it as well. But yeah, it's usually you can find them in the desert if you look hard.
Great. So yeah, that's a great option for people who don't like alcohol or for kids too.
So the ashwagandha, you could just steep it like a tea, is that what if you wanted just to get the loose?
For the ashwagandha? Absolutely. Ashwagandha, because it's a root, it is best steeped well covered for a longer period of time. So I don't know if Suzanne would do anything differently, but what I usually do is boil the water, remove it from heat, and then you put the herb in and let it sit for 20 minutes. Sometimes you can boil the root in the water.
Yeah, with roots, I usually recommend, most roots, there's some exceptions, but with something like ashwagandha, I usually recommend simmering it with the lid on it for about 15 or 20 minutes.
You can take pills too, I take pills. Ashwagandha pills.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
And is your practice here, or is it in
I'm sorry?
Is your practice here?
It's here in Prescott. I practice at Synergy Wellness Center.
Are those your cards?
Yes.
Stampede to get the cards.
Yeah. Topical magnesium, again for sleep. I've been using that, and as well as some oral supplements. I thought it helped, but
I think that's great. Especially, I use it a lot in people who have chronic muscle tension and either don't want to take magnesium orally or need a little extra help. So for people who have restless legs or have, a lot of shoulder tension, for example, I think it's great.
Do you have a brand that you recommend for vitamin C supplements?
did you do this the topical?
I have. If you're gonna take pills,
A brand for vitamin C supplements, I like food-based products. I don't have any connections with this company. I like, what are they called? Mega Foods is great. They have a one brand under their company, which only goes through doctors' offices, and then Mega Foods is their commercially available line. Yeah, so it's the same product, but it's just available on grocery store shelves.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Any other questions for me today? Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you. Really nice.
Thank you.